Welcome back to our professional development session. Today we will be talking about the power of resiliency. Before we get started, we have a couple of poll questions that we'd like to ask everyone, so you can go ahead and answer on your screen. The first question is, do you have a current resume? Our second poll question is, do you have a LinkedIn.com online resume? Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Michael Wilson so he can share with you his presentation.
Good morning, everybody. This is Michael Wilson again. I wanted to talk with you guys about a very important topic that many of us are working through right now, and it's the power of resiliency, the idea of having some grit as a characteristic that you can work through and help you manage these difficult times. My goal for today is two things. One is to show you a short little video of a person who did a TEDx talk on this, and Michael Wolf afterwards may have a couple of comments because he knows her personally. And then afterwards, we're going to go through some PowerPoint slides to talk about what it is and how we can manage it. So I'm going to start with the video today, and here we go.
Years old, I left a very demanding job in management consulting for a job more demanding, teaching. I went to teach 7th graders math in the New York City public schools. And like any teacher, I made quizzes and tests, I gave out homework assignments. When the work came back, I calculated grades. What struck me was that IQ was not the only difference between my best and my worst students. Some of my strongest performers did not have stratospheric IQ scores. Some of my smartest kids weren't doing so well. And that got me thinking, kinds of things you need to learn in 7th grade math, sure, they're hard. Ratios, decimals, the area of a parallelogram. But these concepts are not impossible. And I was firmly convinced that every one of my students could learn material if they worked hard and long enough. After several more years of teaching, I came to the conclusion that what we need in education is a much better understanding of students and learning from a motivational perspective, from a psychological perspective. In education, the one thing we know how to measure best is IQ. But what if doing well in school and in life depends on much more than your ability to learn quickly and easily? So I left the classroom and I went to graduate school to become a psychologist. I started studying kids and adults in all kinds of super challenging settings. And in every study, my question was, who is successful here and why? My research team and I went to West Point Military Academy. We tried to predict which cadets would stay in military training and which would drop out. We went to the National Spelling Bee and tried to predict which children would advance farthest in competition. We studied rookie teachers working in really tough neighborhoods, asking which teachers are still going to be here in teaching by the end of the school year. And of those, who will be the most effective at improving learning outcomes for their students? We partnered with private companies asking which of these salespeople is going to keep their jobs? Who's going to earn the most money? In all those very different contexts, one characteristic emerged as a significant predictor of success. And it wasn't social intelligence, it wasn't good looks, physical health, and it wasn't IQ. It was grit. Grit is passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Grit is having stamina. Grit is sticking with your future, day in, day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for years, and working really hard to make that future a reality. Grit is living life like it's a marathon, not a sprint. A few years ago, I started studying grit in the Chicago public schools. I asked thousands of high school juniors to take grit questionnaires and then waited around more than a year to see who would graduate. Turns out that grittier kids were significantly more likely to graduate, even when I matched them on every characteristic I could measure. Things like family income, standardized achievement test scores, even how safe kids felt when they were at school. So it's not just at West Point or the National Spelling Bee that grit matters, it's also in school, especially for kids at risk for dropping out. To me, the most shocking thing about grit is how little we know, how little science knows about building it. Every day, parents and teachers ask me, how do I build grit in kids? What do I do to teach kids a solid work ethic? How do I keep them motivated for the long run? The honest answer is, I don't know. What I do know is that talent doesn't make you gritty. Our data show very clearly that there are many talented individuals who simply do not follow through on their commitments. In fact, in our data, grit is usually unrelated or even inversely related to measures of talent. So far, the best idea I've heard about building grit in kids is something called growth mindset. This is an idea developed at Stanford University by Carol Dweck, and it is the belief that the ability to learn is not fixed, that it can change with your effort. Dr. Dweck has shown that when kids read and learn about the brain and how it changes and grows in response to challenge, they're much more likely to persevere when they fail because they don't believe that failure is a permanent condition. So growth mindset is a great idea for building grit, but we need more. And that's where I'm going to end my remarks, because that's where we are. That's the work that stands before us. We need to take our best ideas, our strongest intuitions, and we need to test them. We need to measure whether we've been successful, and we have to be willing to fail, to be wrong, to start over again with lessons learned. In other words, we need to be gritty about getting our kids grittier. Thank you.
Okay, Mike. Is there anything you'd like to add before I get started with our presentation?
Well, I'm not sure the audience knows, but my doctoral dissertation included grit as one of the research areas that I was very passionate about. And, you know, Dr. Angela Duckworth is somebody that I did get to know through email back and forth and through her work. And so I hadn't followed up with her. I haven't done much writing, any journal articles or anything like that, but it really, she hits it spot on. And I guess, you know, having gone through academia and then trying to build out this Minnesota STEM partnership and Power Up IT, really, I saw it, and that's why I got passionate about it, because a lot of our kids have grit, you know, but the words that are used in the street are the hustle, the grind, the whatever, right? But if you truly believe in something, meaning, you know, part of that is you have a deep passion for it, whether it be money, whether it be success, whether it be, you know, you want a new pair of Jordans, right? Just trying to keep it real. That's a very expensive thing. We will work very hard to try to achieve that goal. But the difference is with this, we're talking about careers and professional development. You have to be able to be gritty. One, you have to have those characteristics, but you also have to have a passion or a light about doing something. And for me, it was always, the passion was about money. I always wanted to have money, even from, I was laughing, 12 years old, being a paper boy, right? I wanted to go roller skating. So, you know, it was a means to the ends that I really wanted. So grit, I think, and resiliency, because if you're going to, you know, turn squad left at every single obstacle, you're going to have to keep working harder and harder and harder. And you know, there's a lot of other things I could say, but Mike, yeah, I think you picked an incredible topic.
Good, good. I'm glad that we're discussing this. Our goal for today is to just try and demystify it a little bit with some terms, definitions, ideas about how to build it. And so I'm going to turn to a PowerPoint presentation and go from there. Does everybody, let's make sure everybody can see my screen here. And we'll start with these, we'll start with these PowerPoints here, and we'll start a slideshow.
Great. Yeah, looks good.
Good, good, good. All right. The video used the term grit. We're going to use the term resiliency. I think we're speaking about the same thing. Let's recognize what the professionals describe as resiliency. I like the term bouncing back and personal growth. But what I think is most important is what folks in the professional community, the academic community recognize. It's not a personality trait. It's not like somebody being humorous or something. It's something that actually can be developed. And I think that's a really important, maybe the most important takeaway from this presentation today. The grit is something that can be developed through your own actions and relationships of people that are in your life. So what are these things that build resiliency? I think the single most important factor is having somebody in your life who is stable, who's committed, is supportive, and it may be a family member, it may be somebody else in the community, it may be a coach, it may be a high school counselor. So it's great if it comes from your home. Let's recognize it may come from other sources in the community. And we're blessed to live in a community with many resources that are available. For me, some of the people that had the biggest impact for me were related to the Minneapolis Parks and Recreation Board. I was a park board kid. I spent time there just about every single day, and there were a lot of great people there that influenced my life, whether it was coaches, park directors and things like that. I think it's also important to recognize that we make some choices and to prioritize those relationships with people who have empathy, who do understand, is a really important place to be. And I think that characteristic also exists, and I hope that exists for each one of you. If you take a minute to scan the landscape of your life and the people that come in and out of it, you'll probably recognize a few people who have those characteristics. And let me tell you, it's not always the cool people that are those people. For me, in the field that I chose, if you would have seen the two of us, the person who was a mentor to me, who was empathetic and understanding, you would have probably never guessed that we had such a tight relationship. So those people that are positive in your life are really a treasure for you. There are other things that you can do. Joining a group, whether it's a civic group, Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, or a faith-based community group, is also an area of personal development and growth and can result in building resiliency. There's also a number of things that you can do individually. Practicing mindfulness, journaling, yoga, prayer. Those types of things are very powerful on the impact of your psyche. Of course, we want to avoid negative outlooks. We want to avoid negative things like substances or drugs. That, self-explanatory. That's not going to help. What I find incredibly important, and this happened to me during my professional career, when I, encountered turbulent waters, is finding purpose by helping others, giving back. What do they describe it? Pay it forward. Those folks who've helped you in your life, they're probably looking for a return by you helping somebody else. And so taking a minute to slow down, focus on helping others can be really incredibly helpful and satisfying, and maybe more satisfying than you even know. I remember at a difficult career point when I was in Atlanta, things weren't going my way, and somebody gave me that piece of advice: find something else that's bigger than you that you can help with, and that had an incredible impact on my life. And then finally, the importance of just keeping things in perspective, having a hopeful outlook, recognize you're going to learn from the past. That's a very important mindset. As I say to students, there's two outcomes. I'm either going to win or I'm going to learn. It's not about losing. If it went my way, great. If it didn't go my way, I want to make sure I took something out of that experience. I learned from it. Okay, so how do we do this? Keeping those things in mind. I think it's important to get enough sleep and exercise, practicing thought awareness, making sure you're staying positive, learning how to let things go, and being able to respond to it. We want to orient ourselves to thinking about negative situations and bad events through positive thinking, learning from our mistakes and failures, choosing our response, being very careful in how we respond. I'm going to take a minute to describe that for a second. Oftentimes we're presented with things that we don't believe, we don't think it's the right thing to do, and it's easy for our initial response to kind of lash back and say, no, this is crazy, I'm not down with it, I'm just not going with it. And what I find is a really, really helpful technique for me is to write something in response to something that is negative or something I don't agree with, but not to send it anywhere, okay? If somebody says, if somebody came up to me, for example, and said, hey, due to there's some shortfalls, we're gonna have to lay you off, the very first thing I might think is, well, why don't you lay off the next person, or respond in a way that is negative. But I think what's really important there is to take a day or two to really think about that. Take a day or two to recognize what your feelings are, and then give it a day before you actually respond. I run into that all the time. When I publish articles, my goal is to publish articles with what are called peer-reviewed journals, where people who are my peers review my articles, take a look at them, give me feedback, and sometimes I don't like the feedback they give me. I always make a mistake when I immediately respond. If I get the feedback today, I shouldn't respond today. I know that, right? I just need to, let it marinate a little bit. Let that thing settle. Let me make sure I understand exactly what they're saying. Give it a day or two, maybe write down my initial thoughts, and then come back and recast where I'm at. So those are the types of things that we all can do to make sure we kind of keep the temperature down and we don't lose it, okay? Other things that are important are to set goals. I think it really does matter. I look back at some of the goals that my wife and I set, for example, in the 90s. We both decided to take a turn to education. We planned it out, we thought about it. Those are very helpful when you have long-term goals that you know that you're trying to achieve. All of these things help to build your self-confidence, help you build strong relationships, and I'll also allow you to focus on being flexible. So we're at this very difficult time. It's unprecedented. There's a lot of stress out there. People's mental health is being challenged by these difficult times. And as you kind of continue to see the extension of all of these troubles, whether it might be oil prices today or vacancies in hotels and all of the work that's being ground to a halt as a result, and 22 million people claiming unemployment. These are really difficult times. So it's important to make sure, first of all, that you're okay, to look internally, make sure you're well, find a purpose, think of others that are struggling maybe even more than you, to embrace some healthy thoughts, and of course, always to seek help. There's a number of professionals out there. These resources should be used when it comes to mental health, okay? So these elements to resiliency, the idea of challenge, commitment, and personal control gives us the power to overcome these setbacks. And we'll come out of this on the other side in much better shape. So that's the idea of what we want to really emphasize today and have you guys think about as you go about your everyday responsibilities, and recognizing that these are really difficult times, but we can get through it. I know you can. Okay, Mike, is there anything that I can expand on, or are we in pretty good shape?
No, I think we're in pretty good shape. I think resiliency is absolutely critical. And, you know, the thing that I've always realized is that even the way I've absorbed knowledge and information is just making sure that they know that they're not alone in this, you know, that it can be learned, right? So you can develop this. And that's one of the reasons that, you know, you and I and Lindsay are here doing the professional development series, is just so that we can expose the students to opportunities to learn and grow with some very deep core fundamental characteristics that will help them through their life. It will definitely help them through an interview and building a resume, because think about it, if you've never done something before and then all of a sudden you have to do this new kind of foreign thing, I mean, it's hard enough just going to school to survive high school, right? To just survive. And I think you were implying that with today's, you know, situation. But then to go through the mechanics of, hey, now I have to find a job because I'm going to graduate soon. You know, do I want to find a job that, you know, I don't have family members that automatically can give me a job, right? Or what do I want to pursue in the long run? But just to stick with showing up every Tuesday here, or to show up to class, get your resume done, understand those values that you have, then build on it to do, you know, the online. Now I got a resume. Well, you know, it took a long time because somebody had to edit it. Like you even said when you submitted those journal articles that sometimes you don't receive the feedback too well, right? And that's a human reaction. Everybody has that. And you know, I too had to learn, don't respond to the email. At least don't even save it as draft. You know, if anything, write it in a word processor so that you don't actually hit send, because you don't, it may be different in the morning after you sleep on it or think about it a little bit longer. But you have to also be flexible and adaptable to receive that information.
That's right.
Willing to accept it and ask for it. Don't ask for something that you're not going to want to deal with, right? And then to go through the process, and then, you know, and stop me too, because I'm kind of on a little roll soapbox, but, you know, I just look at all the things that a high school student has to do just to get an internship or a job, apply to college, and this whole crush of life is hitting them in the face. Plus, you and I might have to realize that we're from a different generation. I mean, quite honestly, and their lives are all different. You know, I see students that are like, oh, you know, it's so hyped to be an entrepreneur. It's so hyped to be this, you know, to be my own person, I'm just going to code and hack all day, right? Until you get sick and you have to pay that $6,000 for a basic, you know, broken arm or a basic doctor bill, or you're not under your parents' medical or whatever, right? So you grow up real fast, or you have to get your own apartment. So you realize that some things that are that people always talk about are being glamorous, you have to weed through that, and that required to me some perseverance, because you have to filter out the noise and then stay committed and dedicated to your goal, right? Because a lot of people will tell you that they know stuff, but they actually don't.
That's right.
And they might be misdirecting you and misguiding you because that's their experience, you know, and that's the bulk of what I've seen with a number of the students is, oh yeah, well, you don't want to do this. Well, one of the reasons, you know, not to keep going on this, but I'm still going, is that the most important thing you can do is be true to yourself, but also understand what you want out of life. And if those things lead to having a good job, decent income, and you're brand new into this and you have to be trained to know somebody, it doesn't hurt to go through the process of getting a coach like Dr. Wilson, having him help you develop your resume, build your online profile, and follow these steps to get in the door to a company or a business, right? Because there's a lot of hackers, a lot of independents, me included, who with the recent economic situation with COVID, there's no income, right? You don't have a safety net. And like you said, why did you lay, you know, for somebody like that, why did they lay them off and not, why they lay me off and not them, right? These are all too real, students. So, you know, I just hope that many of you do hear this and are able to say, hey, you know, at least if anything, let's stick with this. Let's get our resume together. Let's get our online profile, and let's listen to these videos that could give you a lot of advice, you know, a lot of solid advice there, Mike. So resiliency, if you know, you can't be just a flame flickering and getting blown out by a little wisp of wind, right? You gotta have some guts and courage, right? So it's not easy, folks, but you can do it. You can absolutely do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. And a final thought again is just to emphasize those positive relationships that are in the community. Dr. Wolf is one. There's others out there that, you know, if you really think about it, those people who keep it real by being honest with you, don't necessarily tell you what you want to hear, but challenge you in ways, but are interested in you, those people they're little gold mines, and it can come from anybody. Just let it be authentic.
Yeah.
We have one quick question here. Someone was asking, what are the different relationship groups that students need to build? Yeah,
great question there. One of the things that I think about is the very first relationship that you can think about is something that's civic-minded. I think all of us, I don't want to say, I wouldn't call it a responsibility, but all of us may have an interest in doing something in terms of public service in our community. Often that can come from church, groups like Boy Scouts, things like that. It could come from groups at school. So I think a public service orientation when you're thinking about more than yourself is a great one. I think a second one is a professional type organization. If you're interested in computer science, something in the area of professional organizations, almost all the professional organizations I know have, they're organized, at least an element is organized around professionals of color, and they are always interested in supporting students. I think the other thing is networking and learning how to build relationships. Excuse me there. Building relationships comes to mind when you start to think about asking people for an informational interview. Somebody you know that seems to be doing something that you're interested in. I think it's really valuable to ask of that person if you can learn more about what they do. People just have a natural tendency to want to talk about themselves. So that's an easy one. Just asking people what they did, how they got there, what path they took, which areas would you focus on, would they focus on if they were you? So those three characteristics are things that come to mind.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And, you know, we talked earlier, Lindsay took a poll to see how many people had a LinkedIn online profile. Well, I found LinkedIn to be very powerful for me, even as a seasoned vet, right? So I'm looking for other people that are in a specialty area that I'm interested in, you know, enterprise architecture, for example. I can go and do a search and find the other people in that career field. And if somebody's profile, after researching, you know, what their background is, I can actually say, hey, you know, there's these different certifications. Which one would you suggest being the expert in this area that I should pursue, right? So yeah, very powerful. And even like you said, just reaching out to, for instance, this video gets posted in the Minneapolis Black Employee Network group, right? And so with the engagement of Facebook groups and other groups that are available to you, I'm sure that there's tons of caring adults, you know, that would be willing to share their experience with, as well as, you know, we have our focus, you know, at Power Up IT is really technology, right? And so one of the biggest organizations for persons of color, IT professionals, is BDPA, as well as NSBE. That's very technical on the engineering aspect, and that's NSBE. And so even joining, you know, those types of organizations to reach out are great, as well as others, right? The Hispanic engineers and all different types of affinity groups. But your advice is well received, Mike. But they got to be gritty. You know, they got to be gritty. Get gritty. That should be our new tagline, right? Get gritty.
Right on. I love it. All right, guys. Thank you.
All right. Well, Mike, thank you so very much. Lindsay, any closing thoughts? Any other questions from the audience? I see a few.
No other questions.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining this session on April 21st, 2020. And we hope that you all have a wonderful and productive day. Please consider getting your resumes together, get your online profile. However, if you do want to speak to Dr. Wilson or myself, you can send an email to interns@mnstempartners.org, and that's we'll put it up on the panel when we see the video uploaded on YouTube. But it's interns at basically minnesotastempartners.org, mnstempartners.org. So again, on behalf of Lindsay and myself and Dr. Wilson, you all have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you very soon. We'll see you next week this time.